Waterdeep, Dragon Heist. A series of journal summaries detailing the adventure of those who recovered the lost gold of the Vault of Dragons. Protagonists. Finn the Warlock. When Oblivion was a teenager, his whole family caught the plague. At the age of 17, he went to a fey place to bargain to be healed, and for the ability to save those he loved. Kais, Queen of Shadow and Darkness, appeared, and told him that she would keep his family alive if he pledged himself to her service and did not interact with his human family again. His womanizing father didn't care, and his grandfather didn't want a half-elf on the throne. His mother, feeling the remainder of her family was in danger, fled soon after. Kais often demanded things of Oblivion, who now went by Finn, to test his loyalty, which he obeyed. While he didn't know who Cicely's father was, Kais had hinted she is related to him. Kais kept Finn under the thumb of her cult of warlocks, the servants of Kais, and had marked Finn with griffin-like ears and yellow face markings of subservience. Cicely the Orphan. Cicely was a half-elf who spent the first 8 years of her life at the orphanage of the Setting Sun. She was never the strongest or the brightest of her peers, but she was different. There were many kids that came in and out of the orphanage, all humans. None of them looked like Cicely. She was frail and small, but absolutely beautiful. The kids made fun of her for her bright coral hair and large pointy ears. They would torture her, girls would cut her hair and boys would punch her just because it amused them how quickly the bruises appeared on her porcelain skin. The sister monks always turned a blind eye towards the bullying. One day, Cicely had enough and decided that she'd rather lay in the damp wet streets, starved and cold, than to put up any longer with the abuse. She took all that she could fit into her rucksack, spare change of clothes, a lapel pin, from her parents, and whatever food she could find. She left and spent the next 2 years on the streets of Trade Ward in Waterdeep. For the first year she was basically alone with only the company of her pet mouse, Poppy. About a year after she left she met a man named Three Strings in Trade Ward. She had heard him play daily and would listen to his beautiful music while laying on a nearby rooftop. He noticed her one day and then briskly made leaps to where she was. He introduced himself, gave Cicely some food, and she instantly trusted him. From that point on he had taken it upon himself to look after Cicely. He called her sick and trained her in bardic ways, buying her first instrument on her 9th birthday, a harmonica. Sometime before her 10th birthday, however, a half-elf man took her under his wing, unknown to her that it was her cousin, Oblivion, who went by Finn. Mel Firebottom. Mel originally started out as a snake oil salesman, creating and selling products with great abilities that were just a sham. Over his time doing shady things he acquired a good number of contacts in the criminal world, but ultimately was shut down by a half-orc city watchman named Arif. Arif took a liking to Mel and they became a sort of frenemies, with Arif hanging around with Mel to make sure he didn't get himself in any more trouble. Arif Norris. Arif Norris was a dedicated half-orc member of the City Watch of Waterdeep. He caught a shady sorcerer named Mel selling sham products, but instead of jailing him, decided to let him off easy, on the condition he change his ways. Arif saw good in Mel and started spending time with him, making sure that he didn't get himself in more trouble. Duncan the Depressed. Little is known about Duncan, the stout halfling monk. It is known that he grew up an urchin, yet within Waterdeep or without one cannot tell. He was known to be eccentric, highly acrobatic and sometimes a nuisance for the sake of being a nuisance. But behind the crazed look that could be mistaken for fun that often danced on Duncan's face, there was the question of whether he really was alright inside, or whether his mind, and even his soul, would ultimately and eventually break down completely. Part 1. A Friend in Need. The party met after an intense bar fight in the Yawning Portal and were hired by Volathamp Gedum, Volo, which started off their questing together, all the while Arif keeping a suspicious eye on Mel, Finn carefully watching Cicely and Duncan attempting triple backflips quite frequently. The party progressed through several interesting situations, like Duncan causing trouble by stealing the journal of a curiosities shop owner, as well as having a jolly time with rugged drunkards in a Dock Ward tavern. The most significant event however occurred when the party infiltrated a Gent warehouse invaded by Kenku, warehouse which Duncan lit on fire. Finn had stayed outside with Cicely while Arif and Mel had gone in after Duncan. In the ensuing and blazing chaos, Duncan and Mel both fell unconscious and near death in the fire. Arif, his blue-blooded instinct kicking in, firemen carried both bodies, first Duncan's then Mel's, and tossed them out the window to safety, all in the midst of fire and Kenkus. Cicely cast a healing spell on Mel, who woke up just in time to witness the man who saved his life perish in the warehouse fire. The Kenkus then ran away and the City Watch showed up, but all too late for our friends. Torak Ungot. What can be said about Torak Ungot? He was a blue-blooded city watchman that just wanted to magnify his duty, much like the later Arif Norris. His aid to the adventurers, though brief, was a welcome and worthy addition to a great story. Joined by a local city watch guard, the party pushed on with their new member to find Floon. After trudging through some sores and facing a close call or two, they were able to rescue him and return him to Volo, though Duncan did attempt to attack him once or twice. In fact, shortly thereafter the halfling's mental state went sharply downwards, as he had at least one recorded suicide attempt. Ultimately, Duncan mysteriously disappeared. The city watch guard Torak also returned to his duties after assisting in finding Floon. Volo gave the party the deed to Trollskull Manor as payment, and though it was quite run down, they set out to fix things up as soon as they could get the funds. Part 2. Trollskull and Ghosts. The party arrived at Trollskull Manor and met the native poltergeist Liv. They would go on to study more about his mysterious identity. They also were recruited into several factions, Finn by the Gentrim, Cicely by the Harpers, and Mel by the Grey Hands, inspired to a shift in life direction from his criminal past by his fallen comrade. Mel and Cicely carried out their first faction missions without much incident. Finn, unfortunately, suffered a gruesome alleyway death in the dock ward, his mass amounts of gold from charlatans selling stolen. Catalina Ileana Alessandra Aberelli. Though not the strongest crime organization in Waterdeep anymore with the rise of Xanathar and the Gentrim, the Aberellis were certainly one of the oldest. Operating as a sort of mafia, their patron saint was Tyre of the Silver Tongue, who valued cunning and wit above all else. Giovanni was the boss, and Catalina his daughter. He had no other children and no wife. As Giovanni's heir, Catalina had been taught and trained for the position all her life. The time inevitably came for her to build her own fortune and her own network to solidify her position and gain the fear and respect of those she was destined to command. Oriana the Tiefling. Oriana, though an urchin, was not born in the city. When she was 6 she took a trip to Waterdeep and was separated from her parents. The only thing she possessed to remember them by was a locket her mother had given her with their family crest. From time to time she would sell the locket when she was starving, but always would keep track of where it was to steal back later. At 17 a close friend of hers was killed in her effort to reclaim the locket. This led her to really work on her sorcery to protect herself and the people she cared about. Oriana lived on her own for some time. However, after failing to steal from a man and girl and not being killed by them, she was curious about them and followed them around town. This led to a deadly encounter with a mysterious man and the group barely escaping with their lives. That night Ori learned the world was scarier than she thought. That night, Mal got an unexpected visitor through his second-floor window that started rummaging through his belongings. A tiefling urchin named Oriana was looking for food. Mal, after putting her to sleep with a spell and removing her to the hall, went back to sleep himself. At dawn he came downstairs shortly after Cicely to find another visitor in the house. They'd been unexpectedly joined by crime lord Giovanni Aberelli's daughter, who had just set out on her own to build her own fortune and network, hoping to get a leg up and be aided by the recently famous adventurers. After a semi-tense night of break-ins and introductions, all four went looking for Finn together, ultimately finding out from the city watch about his demise. This caused Cicely to have no small breakdown, resulting in her running away and seeking repose on the city rooftops. Eventually more investigation was done, and collectively the new party retraced Finn's footsteps and found his killer. He was a tough sucker though, putting up more than a fight by not only killing the drunk half-elf he was after, but also bleeding Mel unconscious and, worst of all, killing Catalina Aberelli. Old Maggie the Haggard. Let me tell you of the truth about the past of the one they called Old Maggie. The Avarial are a winged elven race that live above in a high cloud-like city. They live much longer than other elves, close to 1,000 years. They feel very superior because of this and stay apart from the other much shorter-lived, earth-dwelling species. Magda, like a few others of her species, was blessed with the power of sight, visions of the past, present, and future. She had a vision of the archfiend Asmodeus rising in power and eventually causing such great destruction and loss of life to those dwelling on Earth. This rise to power would be contributed to significantly by events at the Castellanta residence and their far-reaching effects. She tried to tell the upper people of the Avarial, but they cared not. Young and naive Magda sought to change that future and solicited spell work that would send her forward 700 years. Unfortunately, the spell was shoddy and only sent her forward 500 years. Its failure warped her perception of when and where she was, as well as physically aging her about 200 years from her initially young 57. Part of Maggie's visions was a familiarity with Mel and Cicely. The longer she was with them, the more they strengthened and healed her memory. Then what became of her? In all the commotion, the tiefling urchin girl fled. Mel barely managed to get Cicely to a nearby inn before crashing, finding out the following hot summer's morning that the stay and food were courtesy of the Harpers. They took some bread to eat on the road, but a ragged old woman took Cicely's loaf out of her hand while walking down the street. This woman, who seemed to know things but also seemed possibly insane, continued to follow Mel and Cicely until ultimately almost burning down the manor, event which was narrowly prevented by Cicely's quick thinking coupled with some help from the poltergeist Liv, who no longer allowed the old croon into the manor. Mel promptly tied her up and turned her into the city watch for arson. Old Maggie sat in the courthouse cell awaiting trial when Davil Starsong entered and offered her coverage of fines in exchange for some favors for the gentrim. Maggie, finding herself a bit more lucid, agreed, played well during trial, owing only the 1 SP tax in addition to damages to the injured parties, and the 3 split off for the day. Maggie performed the gents' tasks of collecting info on demon-worshipping nobles and info on the street. Cicely did charitable work for the Harpers by saving a woman's cat from a gazer and spent the night performing, after buying a mastiff. And Mel ultimately found gainful employment with a wizard Rincewind in Blackstaff Tower. After Maggie received a potential quest from Davil concerning a haunted house out of town, she brought the matter to Mel and Cicely as a method of earning money to repair the manor, and they ultimately agreed. The party got up early in the morning to arrive at the yawning portal in time to leave. Davil wished them luck as the carefree wagon driver pulled past a group of chanting children out of the city gates. They drove all day to arrive at the haunted house at night. Outside they fought off giant weasels and inside swarms of spiders before delving further down a trapdoor to almost lose their lives to rock grubs. Venturing deeper into the dungeon, they were met with ambushes from smugglers who were waiting for them. They almost downed the whole party, but Cicely ran up to the first floor only to be swarmed by giant centipedes while she was already close to fainting. She thought sending Poppy to Mertz Gardener would be her last hope, but at the last moment her new mastiff Rosebud came barreling in, attempting to fight off the centipedes while telling Cicely to run. She ran out of the house to find the wagon gone, but 2 horses carrying 3 Harpers came galloping up to rescue her. They quickly rushed in and made short work of the smugglers, then 2 of them left to assist in other duties while one, Eridin, stayed with the party. It was he and Cicely that discovered that in bravely fighting the centipedes, poor Rosebud had died. The day would get darker however, as after an 8-hour lookout session, the party ventured into caverns deeper to be affronted by Sambalay and the rest of his henchmen. Down went Cicely, Maggie, Eridin. Only Mel survived till the brutal end to kill all but Sambalay, but by then all his comrades were dead. He took all the treasure the smuggler leader had to offer, leaving him sobbing in his quarters. He then took Cicely's lifeless body, not yet knowing of her soul being in the Harper pin she wore, loaded the rowboat sitting in the cave, and made the silent, solemn journey back home. Akira the Half-Orc. Akira's heritage is a bit, shall we say, unorthodox. Her mother was an orc. Her father was what may be called a very ballsy, you must be to impregnate an orc, half-elf adventurer, and quite in every way a royal bastard. Akira, Orky, didn't find out about her father's royal tree until one night when he got very drunk, and ended up divulging all about a sun elf kingdom, royal murder, and a baby princess that was rumored to have been carried away by her handmaiden. The babe princess, if she really was alive, had been cared for by a wet nurse from Waterdeep. This is what brought Key to Waterdeep, on the off chance of finding out more about her own origins. Having been kindly towed in by a sea maiden's fair ship, Mel sold his boat after enlisting a half-orc's help to load his cargo on a wagon and transport it home. They then travelled together to sell the 3 bolts of silk, 5 casks of brandy, 7 silver bars, Eridin's harper pin and a Giovanni painting, to none other than Giovanni the mobster. Mel and Key took Cicely to the House of Holy Hands and made payment of 1,250 dragons, plus a donation of 1. After an hour of tense waiting, Cicely was raised from the dead. Mel returned her harper pin and mouse before they all returned home. They also got a quote from a representative of the Carpenters Guild on how much it would be to renovate the tavern, which she explained as 1,000 G in renovation expenses and 250 G in guild licenses and contracts. While waiting for Cicely to recover, the group did some trading of the items they had. Akira went to Davil for more work and was given the task of continuing what the party had started at the haunted house by shutting down the heart of the smuggling operation on the sea. They decided to wait for Cicely to fully recover and leave the morning of the 9th. Joined by 2 veteran mercenaries for hire, Nadia and Gerard, they all 5 set out again for the haunted house. Arriving in the evening, they searched the house, set up camp and together planned what they would do when the sea ghost showed. Davil had given them a big clue in a paper he had found recovering Maggie's body that indicated the signaling system used by the smugglers. Mel surmised after finding a lantern in the house that it must be used for this purpose. They kept watch for the next 4 nights in shifts, looking out for any signals from sea. On the night of the new moon, the darkest night of the month, while the party was preparing their fishing boat in the caverns, Akira, on watch, saw the signal from out at sea. After her appropriately signaling back, the ship confirmed reception and that they should come aboard. The 5 adventurers rowed all the way out to the pirate ship to board. The 2 pirates waiting were unconvinced but were put to sleep by Mel, tied up, and thrown overboard by Akira to their watery graves. A search of the rooms on the main deck led ultimately to a run-in with the captain, deck wizard and several crew members, who all were slaughtered by the party and hardened mercenaries. While the group rested in the captain's cabin, the first mate ran into them as well, and found himself tied up while they tried to use him to bargain 3 lizard folk off the ship. The first mate ultimately escaped and got himself killed. The party then paid the 5 remaining pirates to disclose the location of the weapons cache and let them go, afterwards delivering said weapons to the lizard folk on board, who took the other boat and also departed in peace. The adventurers returned to Waterdeep, notified Davil of their success, and moved part of the contraband on board at the local gent-friendly town of Shallowtown, as well as getting some custom work done on the sea ghost to cover its royal origin. Returning to the manor, they had a brief visit from the Fellowship of Innkeepers reminding them of their plan to renovate the tavern. Mel then went to Broxley to join the Fellowship of Innkeepers, get set up with guild licenses and contracts and start renovations, putting the necessary gold down and paying the rest a few days later. Upon returning home, he was paid a visit from Alcoria Stonemarrow, after which he joined the Watchful Order of Magists and Protectors. The party travelled to sell the remainder of the ship's contraband save 10 bolts of silk. On arriving back in Waterdeep, Mel received a task from the Black Staff, which he promptly completed. He also paid overdue docking fees, and after some conversation with Schofield and later conversation with Cicely and Akira, joined the Master Mariners Guild and traded the greater ship for a smaller keelboat. Akira having secured another odd job concerning a local jackal were, the group had their weapons silvered and a couple days later confronted and obliterated the beast in a nearby alley. Their desired major transactions being completed, on top of the renovations, they paid for other additions to the tavern as well, namely the reinforcing of a safe room on the second floor complete with an iron door and lock, as well as a slide coming down from the turret and a private bathroom for Akira's bedroom on the second floor. With the renovations now complete, our party began to take on hirelings to run the tavern, including 4 halfling friends and a books clerk named Giles. Part 3, Fireball. Boom! A firebally explosion in the alley woke the characters from their beds, who rushed down, in Cicely's case slid down, to investigate. The scene was all in commotion, with the city guard and city watch flooding in soon after. The characters, however, conducted their own investigation, and through various means discovered that an automaton had thrown a bead of a necklace of fireballs into the alley where 3 gents, one having gotten away, were chasing a gnome who bore a very valuable object. Their investigation ultimately led them to Growlhund Villa, which the surviving gent supposedly vanished into. After finding and eyeing the villa, the party decided they better wait till morning to check it out. With the gates closed, they were stumped until the stable boy came out and Cicely slipped through, magically disguised as him. Chaos ensued when she convinced the draft horses in the stable to break down the door and stampede out, waking up the sleeping groundskeeper who, confused and angry, worked to round the horses up and get them back in. The party was able to slip by and into the house, where they downed a couple thugs and dawdled around until the city watch arrived. They would later fill the characters in on the events that transpired. Later that day, rumours of the tavern being rat-infested were revealed and Istrid Horn asked to lie low at the tavern for a 10-day. For the Grey Hands, Mel tailed a man at the Yawning Portal for a 10-day who was enchanted with an axe, and for the Harper, Cicely interviewed a group of doppelgangers to gauge their trustworthiness. All the while they dealt with progressively more pressure in the media about their tavern's reputation, and ultimately a petition was signed against them claiming they were using the manor as a front for Werewolf thieves. The City Watch now got involved and started conducting their own investigation pending the closure of the tavern. The investigation didn't last long. That night, the rash halfling Werats tried to pull a heist on the tavern safe room. Fumbling, they were unsuccessful in both stealth and lockpicking, and Saffron alerted all the tavern residents, who awoke and promptly attacked the beasts. One of them barely escaped. The Fiddlewick sister fell unconscious from blood loss, and while her brother sobbed on the ground, the other gang member was brutally slaughtered by Cicely and Akira while trying to get away. Kelso Fiddlewick was restrained from trying to help his bleeding out sister, but by a miracle she was able to be saved by the efforts of the guards and Cicely, who had to be paid by Akira to do so. The following morning, Sergeant Cromley visited the manor to inform the group that the investigation was closed and they needn't worry about further accusations. 3 Strings that day visited Cicely to say that he was her new Harper contact and induct her into the Council of Musicians. Also, a young man solicited to put a notice board in front of the tavern, which was agreed to. The notice board accumulated postings for Werbeast Blood, a wanted Nimblewright, a dog walker and magic item services from Delrund of the Watchful Order, whom Akira enlisted to fashion her a frosty black greatsword. Her and Cicely went on a werewolf hunt and totally annihilated it, bringing 2 cups of blood to the happy, if eccentric, collector at the Yawning Portal. The whole party then visited the House of Inspired Hands and found a different Nimblewright who gifted them the detector he created to find the one he made. On the way home, Mel holding down the device's trigger the whole time, they found the Nimblewright in an alley. Immediately they attacked it and destroyed it, cashing in rewards from the temple and city. Tucked in the construct's half-destroyed face was a map, showing the City of the Dead and an X marked over the Casalanta Mausoleum. Cool! Everyone then promptly forgot about it and had a banquet with head chef Garbino. Part 4, Dragon Season. After some searching for the Casalantas, Cicely got a message from Three Strings that there was a cache of 500,000 dragons hidden somewhere in Waterdeep, and the key to finding it was the Stone of Golor, which the party deduced must be in the mausoleum. They executed a plan to hide there just before closing and break in at night using a gifted knock spell scroll. Inside the dark mausoleum were 3 bodies, one of which was still breathing but then was rashly and brutally slaughtered by Akira. Good thing they found a scrap of paper on another body that said Windmill South Ward. Well, they found that broken down windmill, and at the top was a door with a shiny lock which Akira broke down. Inside 2 figures were passing a shiny stone to 3 spined devils at the window. Rushing now, Mel put the devil taking the stone to sleep, causing it and the stone to fall on the ground. Akira and the cultist both dove for it, the cultist nimbly grabbing it right before one of the remaining devils snatched it up and both flew out the window across the rooftops. Cicely hopped out the window chasing the devils across the rooftops while Mel and Akira stayed in and fought the cultists. Across the urban roofs she went, gradually gaining on them until they ducked into an alleyway. Cicely expertly scaled the 3-story building down and saw the devils handing the stone to a tiefling man by a hire coach. Cicely lanced out witch bolt at the man who dropped the stone and turned into a horrendous bearded devil. She grabbed the stone with mage hand and pulled it to her, but before she could escape she was surrounded by the devil and his imps, and overwhelming her, they left her on the ground to die. Akira and Mel found her lifeless body on the ground after looking in the direction she went for a while, and immediately took it to the House of Holy Hands. This was a lucky day for all, they were able to resurrect Cicely again. It wasn't lucky all around, though. The Stone of Golor had fallen into the hands of the Casalantas, which was told to both Akira and Cicely by their factions. Cicely, still needing to rest, sent her mouse with Mel and Akira to sneak into the Casalanta residence, discover what existed there, and plan a heist. Taking the invisible Poppy, they slipped her in front of the villa to infiltrate and see what she could find in an hour. She later relayed the information to Cicely back at home, while Akira was told by the Doom Raiders to get the stone as well. The next day they visited Casalanta Villa again, but then decided they'd rather wait till night to check it out. After some debate about what to do, they scaled the wall onto the grounds. They had a couple close calls with guards but were able to make it to the dazzling butterfly garden. There, Cicely made friends with the children playing outside, who were excited to take her to explore their dad's office. Akira, who was invisible, silently followed. Mel then tried to cross but was stopped by Lady Casalanta up on the balcony, who was able to get him to reveal Cicely's presence. She came downstairs sending the butler to meet him, while Cicely snuck into Victoria's office, not knowing she'd be immediately accosted by a suit of armor. The scene ended with the Casalanta parents, their butler, the 2 kids and Mel staring into the office at Cicely and Akira who had been causing a ruckus. Heatedly, Victoria ordered them out instead of calling the city watch. That night, Cicely had a nightmare about the last time she died. No sleep was gotten that night. The next day they communed in the common room to converse, and decided to stake out the Casalanta residence at night. They discovered that their servants arrive early in the morning and leave late at night. 2 nights later they decided to have an invisibility spell cast on each of them, and together they climbed over the wall onto the grounds of Casalanta Villa. They snuck through the house upstairs to try and reach the sulfur-smelling room. It was locked and impenetrable without a key. They searched a bit more and, on their way out of the Casalanta's bedroom, the rope that tied Mel and Akira together got a little too taut while they hurried. They froze, while Cicely decided to project Lady Casalanta's voice outside, not thinking she was in bed with her husband. Furious, Victoria demanded an explanation, but only got insolence. He heatedly called the guards to get the disrespectful half-orc and her sorcerer friend out. Cicely, untied, had made her escape. Sitting in a cell the next dawn, Mel and Akira heard someone overcome the guards. Watch Captain Staggett showed up and freed them, warning the Magister was corrupt and that they should skip town. They quickly complied, Mel entrusting the safe room key to be delivered to Giles, and they left for the cave near the haunted house in their boat. The same day, Cicely sent a letter to Lady Casalanta after counseling with 3 strings, threatening her and demanding her friends be forgiven. The next day Cicely got a return letter from the lady, assuring her that they were going to settle the matter privily, but because of the escape made the process of clearing their names would take some time, likely a 10-day or so. Mel stopped by Cicely's in disguise and took 200G from the safe room. Part 5, Hell of a Summer. Upon research, Mel discovered the vial he took from the Casalanta study was actually Midnight Tear's poison. Anyone who tasted of it would perish on the stroke of midnight. The morning of the 4th, he and Akira heard the trampling of horse hooves approaching their shoddy abode. They quickly hid out in the dungeon until discovering it was just a messenger from the Grey Hands. They had sent Mel a letter, confused about his fugitive status and wanting to know his intentions. They also let him know Victoria Casalanta had slain the bronze dragon in the harbour. As Mel returned inside pondering on this, a mysterious figure in the corner struck up a conversation. The Black Viper told him that she knew they had been seeking the Stone of Golor. She let them know that Victoria Casalanta knew where the Vault of Dragons was, almost had the 3 keys to open it, and would be emptying the vault the day before Founders Day. Armed with this information, Mel set out for town to inform the Grey Hands of his allegiance to the city. Cicely had a nightmare about the night the gunslinger killed Catalina too. Pretty scary. Akira got her head chopped off, then Mel threw it at a wall and it exploded. Cicely tried to fire the guy's pistol, but flowers came out, then withered and burned to ashes. Imps appeared and he grew a spiky beard. And Mel's body turned into the Stone of Golor. But when Cicely tried to grab it, she woke up to a skinny tiefling boy stealing the gold from her dresser. He scurried up the garret ladder with 2 other children. Cicely threw a ray of frost at him that took a chunk from his side and wounded him badly. The horrified urchins raced down the slide and tried to reach the swords, but Cicely threw another ray of frost that punched right through the boy's stomach and left him bleeding out on the ground. Cicely had murdered a child for money in broad daylight in front of the tavern, and was taken away by the city watch. Later in the day, sitting in her cell, she received a letter delivered from a familiar messenger. Her cell neighbor Franklin was disappointed it wasn't for him. The letter was from Elzarina, inviting her to the Founders' Day feast. Unfortunately, she had been sentenced to a year in a labor camp for her murder. But fortunately, her letter to the Casalantas worked some political magic, and she was cleared of her sentence on the condition that she be exiled until the day after Founders' Day, same as her friends. 3 of the 4 group members, now fugitives, they left town on their boat once more after scouring a bronze dragon scale from the bottom of the harbor. Mel sent a letter to the Grey Hand saying he thought the Casalantas might poison their guests on Founders' Day for a demon ritual of sorts. Mel received a communication from Varja discussing this. Unfortunately, they could not get officially involved, but if Mel were able to prove poisoning discreetly, that could be enough. The Black Viper sent a letter detailing the time and place of Victorio's vault heist. The day before Founders' Day. Mel disguised as a fat man, Akira wearing some odd makeup and having ginger hair. The party re-entered Waterdeep's harbor, docked their boat and went to the tower. Actually, first they bought some manacles and stopped at the market to appraise the dragon scale. By the time they reached the tower, the meeting had just begun. Mel flew in as a fly and Oriana made Akira and then herself Cicely invisible so they could sneak in. They descended to the dark depths and approached the open doors to the vault. Hearing voices coming their way, they hid behind the vault doors until the guards passed by them with their bags of gold. They then snuck deeper in through the open doors at the end of the hall, where Akira and Cicely got enchanted by a fresco. Unable to get them away, Mel stared straight at it and overcame its enchantment, then burned it away with acid while Ori hacked at it until the spell was broken. In this time the guards passed through and back again, and after 5 were entranced by the fresco, Mel hawk-typed them and Akira later slit their throats. The party advanced upstairs and were accosted by the guards, and after not a few failed attempts to jump across and being saved by their mates, Mel jumped and fell on a field the guards had been traversing. They quickly entered the next room and descended a long staircase into the darkness, 3 members followed by the guards followed by Akira. Ultimately a skirmish broke out on the close quarters staircase during descent. It ended with the party split up. The orphans had reached the vault to find an old dwarf and Dagult Neverember demanding they leave in peace. Mel had magically annihilated 2 guards at the bottom of the stairs, and Akira killed 2 more further up the stairs, leaving the 3rd one near death but alive to bear his shame. Arguments broke out about leaving Neverember with the gold that he embezzled, but ultimately they were faced with no choice but to leave. Well, actually Akira and Ori killed the guards by the carriages and tried to steal them for the gold they had, but an earthquake opened up a fissure under them and Akira fell in. Lord Neverember came out and stabbed Oriana in her defiance, but she managed to get away. Akira, gold-hungry to the death, was helped out of the fissure but compelled to give back the gold she took. She too at that point had no choice but to leave empty-handed. As she did, new carriages arrived, and the Rosnar noblewoman and her guards were assaulted by thugs. Desperately fighting for her life, the noble threw a velvet letter at Akira and shouted for her to leave. Akira ran, and turning back noticed Dagult Neverember's form change back to something more true. The Black Viper died at the hands of none other than Victorio Casalanta. The morning of Founders' Day was one of discussion on the group's keelboat. Soon they split up. Cicely and Akira went dress shopping while Mel and Ori scouted Casalanta Villa's exterior before awaiting the parade on the city's main street. Cicely initially got a low-quality dress, but later entered into a wise elderly elf man's shop and got a beautiful gold and silver-lined red dress and mask, and a gold tiara. Later they met up and enjoyed the parade, and in the early afternoon the villa's gates opened to the public. People from all over quickly came to partake of the delicious banquet food and entertainment. While the others went inside, Ori invisible, Cicely with Elzarina and Akira as a bodyguard, Mel, disguised, tested the feast food and confirmed it was poisoned, which other Grey Hands members came by to confirm later. The party inside ventured to the Castellanta's room and up, haphazardly stealing things on the way, before making Terenzio so uncomfortable that he left to get help and the party had to slip through the window to the butterfly garden to get back inside. Ultimately the city watch arrived and cordoned off the area, not allowing anyone to leave or partake of the food any longer. The party slipped with Elzarina into the cellar, followed soon by Amalia Castellanta and then Mel, who slipped in disguised as a server. They discovered a secret door in the wine cellar that led to a vault, absolutely jam-packed with sacks of gold, and followed a dark staircase there down into a hidden temple. While peeking on the balcony, however, it crumbled beneath them, and here came two cultists followed by Mel with Victoro and Amalia Castellanta close behind. The party killed the two cultists but then tried to kill the Castellantas. Victoro, enraged, dominated Mel's mind and demanded the party surrender themselves. Instead, one of them threatened to kill his daughter. He held a spectral sword to Mel's throat and demanded surrender again or he would die. Akira, unconcerned with Mel's life, demanded that Victoro explain himself and the poisoning of the banquet food. Victoro, having exercised infinite patience up to this point, discovered that they would never learn. He slit Mel's throat. The sorcerer's body fell lifeless onto the ground. Akira tried to kill Victoro again. He transformed her into a bird like he did when she was stuck in the fissure. But this time, he tried to step on her. He was unsuccessful, but in a cruel and ironic twist of fate, Cicely squashed her while running to help stabilize Mel. Cicely miraculously stabilized him, but Victoro stomped on Key again when he came back from locking the Tiefling girl away. After a heated whispered discussion between the Castellanta parents, Amalia returned upstairs, leaving Victoro alone with Cicely and his daughter. Victoro dragged Cicely and Mel into cells as well, and dropped Akira's body into the sacrificial hall. Mel also received a letter from Varja saying there was rioting preventing the Grey Hands from entering the grounds, and they had antidote if he could reach them. Victoro and many cultists started making trips back and forth, tossing sacks of gold into a great sacrificial bowl. The three in cells tried to escape up through the cellar, but there were demons that stopped them. Meanwhile, Akira was trying to escape, and managed to kill two cultists that she encountered before hiding in a closet. On the fourth trip of the cultists, two revealed themselves, Mert and an accompanying conjurer. Confronting Victoro, a large skirmish broke out, chaos ensuing throughout the hall until all fell except Mert and Victoro, when Victoro got the upper hand and stabbed Mert in the neck with a poison dagger. Victoro weak at this point, the party began to finish him off when he pleaded for mercy. He told them how his children's souls were in danger of being forfeit unless he made a sacrifice of 99 souls and 1 shy of $1 million gold. Ultimately, the party decided not to help him, but to attempt to save the poor citizens. Mel attempted to convince the cook to put antidote in the food, but the cook attacked him and the men holding him hostage. Eventually Mel was able to start a grease fire and set the cook ablaze. Midnight was fast approaching. Mel put antidote in some punch and convinced a couple dozen people to drink it. Midnight struck. Everyone started coughing up blood. Frantically, Mel started to use magic to shove antidote down as many people's throats as possible. It was a frantic, hectic minute. In the end, 13 died, and the rest survived. The rioting now ended, the Grey Hands broke in the gate and cordoned off the area. Varja asked Mel if he had any evidence that would justify them entering the residence. Suddenly, the front doors of the house were thrown open. Mert busted out of house being stabbed by Bearded Devil. The Grey Hands killed it and ran inside after Varja asked where to look in the house. Mert, dying, said it's okay, now he can finally be with his dear Ospa. The Grey Hands came back out, and Varja thanked the party and explained a 1/10, 50k, reward for their efforts and recovering the lost gold. Victoro was stone-faced and said nothing. Two children ran to the door protesting, and Amalia turned back saying it's alright angels, everything's going to be okay, unable to muster more words. She knew that in a mere few days her children's souls would be forfeit, and taken to the 9 hells, their physical forms transformed into demons just as their brother long ago. The Castellantas set out to sacrifice 1 shy of 100 souls and 1 shy of $1 million gold pieces for their children, but ultimately failed, sacrificing only 13 souls, and a somewhere around 150,000 GP. Epilogue. Well, what better way to end an adventure than with shopping? In fact, to some, shopping is the only adventure they've ever wanted. On the 16th, the party attended a memorial service for Mert, where Varja spoke about the sacrifices of him and all others that laid down their lives for the benefit of the people. The Black Staff then gave the characters their reward, a coffer of 1,000 harbored moons, 50,000 gold. Elzarina asked Cicely if they could spend some time together soon. Cicely, tearfully, said sure, knowing full well they would never see each other again. The fact that the party came into some money did not go unnoticed, as word quickly spread and many obscure individuals showed out of the blue to entreat the newly fortuned residents of Sicily's for financial aid. They did end up financing the Doom Raiders to help keep their branch of the Gentium afloat in Waterdeep, but they had other things to spend their reward on. Mel Firebottom. Mel made Giles a partner in the company and bought him an exquisite desk for the occasion. He decided to invest his money back into his business, and when an old acquaintance Floon showed up asking for help on a gambling debt, Mel decided to offer him a job and open his own little gambling business on the upper floor with poker tables. Additionally, Mel bought the other tavern in Trollskull Alley for relatively cheap when it was foreclosed, the previous owner having accumulated just too much debt. He decided to renovate it and turn it into an inn, purely for guests to stay at and hopefully earning more business at Sicily's. Mel's institution of gambling would go on to rake the business in a substantial amount of cash, eventually turning it into one of the most prosperous small businesses of Waterdeep. He added stables, hired private guards for more security, and had glyphs of warding cast on the safe room. To this day, Sicily's and its accompanying Alinek are a hotspot in Waterdeep that all wealthy travelers are made cognizant of. Sicily the orphan. Sickly had no shortage of inspiration for spending her money. From healing poultices to bouquets and perfumes, pretty weapons to a pretty collar and armor for her dog Saffron, paper birds, a carriage, clothes for every season and an owl that doesn't poop. Sicily would stay at the tavern for some time more, every once in a while bugging Mel enough until he bought her a gift. Akira the half-orc. It wasn't long after the party got their reward that an elderly woman came to the tavern looking for Mel. By this point everyone shooed her away, thinking she was yet another obscure character come to ask for free money. But instead, this woman thanked Mel for saving her life, telling him that she was one of the citizens that almost died to the Casalanta's poison food. This woman's name was Solana. Akira immediately recognized the name. This was the handmaiden she had come to Waterdeep hoping to maybe find. What she found next was unexpected. She was told that the very baby princess that had been taken away from the kingdom was a girl that grew up in the orphanage of the setting sun, and ran away at the age of 9. It was Sicily. It might not have been what she expected, but she really did find a big piece of her origins that day, a piece in the form of a little girl. It didn't make her go soft though, she still bought a bunch of weapons and armor to satisfy her urge to rip and tear. Oriana the Tiefling. Ori, the least connected to the rest of the party, was graciously offered to stay with them as long as she liked, even turning one of the attic rooms into a bedroom for her. Although she had been with them but a short time, they gave her something that she had never had before in her life, a sense of belonging. She also really wanted a blowgun, so she got one of those.